The Australian housing market is undoubtedly broken, like many other Western economies. Politics put heavy importance on supply side issues, believing that it will substantially decrease the prices of houses. However, they neglect a key factor in the sustained growth of Australian real estate: demand. Today, we will explore why demand side factors must be altered if housing is to ever be affordable again in the Australian economy. Australian media coverage of political resolution to soaring houses has skewed public opinions, many thinking that increased housing supply will automatically translate to lower house prices. Now, while increasing supply may help to meet demand needs, there are many hidden challenges to the strategy. Construction of new houses isn't only slow but expensive, with labor shortages, materials, and zoning permits increasing in price. All of these factors will put further pressure on house prices. Furthermore, Australia has outbuilt many other nations in the housing sector. Around 2010 to 2015, Australia built a high number of dwellings per person, even exceeding the rate of the US and UK. So clearly, the demand for houses is largely influencing price mechanism. Many demand factors have culminated over the years to create the housing pressures that you now see today in Australia. Namely, Australia has one of the fastest population growth rates in Western countries, doubling average growth rates in the US and UK. This in turn creates more demand for rentals and lower end houses. Alongside this component has been borrowing capacities ballooning as interest rates remain low. The RBA cash rate has historically hovered around 3.5% from 1990 to 2025, which has artificially inflated house prices as buyers can borrow more. Additionally, Albanese's first home buyer scheme has lowered house deposits down to only 5%. This has not only increased the demand for houses, but also made mortgage repayments harder and longer to pay off. However, Australian and foreign investors alike have the most influence on house prices. Long-held Australian government policy has caused an influx of investors, with negative gearing and tax incentives being the biggest factors. These policies heavily influence investors to put their money solely into real estate as it is tax advantaged. This has fueled artificial demand, as houses are viewed as high-yield, safe haven investment vehicles. The average real estate mogul consequently owns 2, 3, or even 10 houses, whereas first home buyers can't even afford one in the market today. So why won't an increase of housing supply help in the Australian housing crisis? It's pretty simple. Supply will never keep up with demand pressures. Remember, building houses requires time and money. Regardless, migrant numbers and, more importantly, investor interest persists. We must look past supply for a long-term solution to the housing crisis. The demand factors must be highlighted to see systemic change. However, increasing supply will be needed after demand pressures subside. Firstly, adjusting migration acceptance to align with current housing capacity will reduce household demand. However, removing investor incentives such as negative gearing and tax breaks alongside curbing borrowing capacities is most likely to shift housing prices. Australia must focus on demand pressures to prevent the housing crisis from becoming worse in the future. Until the government places demand as highly as supply for issues in the housing market, prices for houses and rents will continue to rise. To see long-term prosperity, policymakers shouldn't ask how to build more homes, but should instead ask how do we lower attraction to houses.